a world that walks the line. There's a rare few who think outside the box together for the crew. To break the equations, not bound to any rule. Exposing to the world the universe's own view. It takes the talent of the craftsman, it takes the mind of the fool, to make the vision realize energy and matter in a duel. To a break, to a duel. The old man Bills was running through his head. Cheryl probably got it hiding under his bed. Penny up to Annie making power for days. Don't listen to a word that the straight dope says. Mike building batteries that power a ship. Victor comes and talking math, that's the water spiral dip. Sean chucking plasma bolts a mile long. Sheila on the video making tones of the prongs. Burning breaking matter, they said it couldn't be done. And to all the people in the chat, I know you're having fun. So it's time to spend your Saturday with the doping old man Bills.
Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Nathan, otherwise known as Old Man Bills. Hey, Joe will be here in just a few minutes, man. We're going to rock out this Friday, man. Awesome times. All right. Dude, we got everybody rocking coming in, dude. Awesome. Dispatchers here, man. Thank you, Paul. Oh, man. Sorry, I'm just looking through everything real quick, guys. Didn't put anything up today. All right. Cool deal, man. Cool deal. All right, Joe and I are going to talk a little bit of time dilation, stuff like that, kind of, if there's some science behind it or not, see what's going on. You know what I mean? Kind of excited, man. Got some stuff coming in, some cool things that just arrived. So I'll be working with some more stuff here soon. I got my GoPro camera thing in there, so it'll extend the lifetime of it for, it says up to 9 hours, but I'd probably say like 4 hours, which is cool because it's aimed straight down at my table, and I'll be able to help everybody when I build stuff. It'll come out looking cleaner, man. So I'm excited about that. And then I got some different color PLA coming in, man, for some coils. That's going to be pretty awesome too. So we got a lot of cool things coming up, man, doing some geometry coils. I'm just working out the last details on the wind I want to do, and then we'll be setting that up. So, man, I'm excited, man. We got some really cool stuff, and I can't wait to get into it, man, just to get into the science of it, build it, get my channel rolling again with some more builds in it. I think that's what everybody's looking for. That's what I'm looking to do. We kind of got through some presentation stuff that we had to do, so it's taking some of the time and everything. And then now we're on to the builds, man. Going to be a cool update later, by the way, on the Traveling Fools channel. If you guys check out that, it's going to be really awesome. We're going to look into James again, and he got a Geiger counter. He put out some numbers, and he got some effects out of it. There are also some other video that I pulled. They kind of matches the sphere that he has, that, long, looks like stainless steel sphere. So that's going to be pretty cool. There's actually quite a bit of them. I didn't realize how many there were, so I was digging through the internet looking for everyone I can find. So that's going to be a pretty cool update with him. There'll be another live interview with him when we start the show later tonight at 7:30 p.m. And you can watch it here on this channel, or you can go to the Traveling Fools channel. I will put that up here as soon as Joe gets in. I'll be able to look for it. But yeah, we got some cool things, man, coming up. It's kind of like an exclusive with James over there and what he's doing. And whether that thing's extraterrestrial or not, he's definitely got some stuff coming off of it. That's for sure. So... yeah, we also got some cool Tesla coil stuff coming up, guys. I'm going to build like a 5-foot Tesla coil. So check this out. I know it's going to sound weird, but I'm going to put like 6 primaries on this thing. And the object is on this coil, and I got different primaries. Can I do 2 at once? Okay, turn them on. Would the center be different than the outsides? Okay. Can you run them? Say this one over here closest where you have this side and this going, then you could look at it, man, and say, okay, what frequencies do we get? It's just going to be just out of the box, see what we get kind of a thing. Joe, what's up, man?
Oh, man, you don't have to call the search party, huh?
Yeah. No, man, you good.
Oh, yeah, you wouldn't even imagine the stuff that I get done in 10 minutes before I come on here.
Just kind of running through it all, man, huh?
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. All right,
Yeah.
so what do we have going on today?
Oh, dude, you were looking at time dilation and everything, and the kind
Uh-huh.
of some of the sciences that are going on with it.
That's it. Yeah, that's what we were aiming for. We know that a lot of the stuff that we talk about and that we do has some kind of weird anomalous effects a lot of the times. It's stuff that we've read about, stuff we've heard about, stuff we've seen, right? And the question kind of comes to mind like, well, if you know what causes it and what it comes from and what things play a role in and those anomalies coming about, well, then you could control it potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's sort of a thing worth exploring, in that hyper specific way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you, Joe. We got a lot of people out here building a lot of things. Have you seen anything that shows it or that would be close to it that we could reference?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is that the visual of it, right, tends to be a little bit difficult. For some types of anomalies, like for instance, time dilation, right? How do you capture that? And have that be objective. I mean, we've discussed different novel ways, to do with clocks and inside of fields and outside of fields and seeing what differences there may be or may not be. But it becomes a little difficult. In a case like that, the silly 2 second long video that I showed you, where I was running the electric, from the uh, handheld Tesla coil into that cat, for instance, like I know what I observed being right there next to it, right? And that was different than what was caught
On camera, yeah.
on the camera. Now, it doesn't mean now it was actually present on the camera, but it just kind of showed itself as like almost what looks like it going in and out of autofocus, which happens all the time, right? So it's easy just to look at something like that and say, well, it was just going in and out of focus because camera was focusing. But that I'm here to tell you, like that's not the case, So you can capture it, but you could always like try to justify your way out of it too. It becomes very easy to bring into question without ever fully being able to confirm or debunk.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting because now we get a lot of people that say they've been through it, and they describe different things that happen in the course of that. I always wonder when you do something like that, like how would you define it? Because to you, time could pass very quickly, right? And to everybody else, it's normal. So no matter, you know what I mean, unless they're in there with you. So would you have people outside? Would you have people inside run the experiment? You know what I mean? Have clocks with
Mhm.
each, set it. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at. What would be the parameters of the experiment that would make sense to everyone out there to say, hey,
Right.
I got it?
I think that's a great question, and it becomes it becomes more complicated than you might imagine because you have to start asking interesting questions. You have to start asking questions like, okay, what is ambient time? Right? Right. So if we're in time dilation, we're experiencing time. Well, what is the ambient time? Well, where we are, it's what our level of dilation is, right? But you go somewhere else, and depending on where you look from, would be your ambient time dilation, right? I don't even know that we know what that ambient time dilation is in the surrounding areas. Like and they try to always intrinsically tie it to gravity, which is interesting. Um, because is there a correlation? I mean, yeah, there's a direct correlation between the passage of time and the experience, and the subjective gravitational pull on something. But again, what does that really come down to? I think it comes down to phasing for time. You see, like when you have a more gravitational pull, well, that pull itself, right? It kind of narrows the uh, the variation, so to speak, of the frequency. So it lies at a much more specific frequency because of the pull at that point. Just the same as we say when you put a waveform into a state of compression, well, it changes the frequency, right? Well, if you continue to compress it and compress it, it continues to change the frequency. And I think that that's sort of the point. Once you realize that if you took a wave and you imagined it like a car crashing into a wall, where more and more wave just kept on crashing into this wall, what you would find is it would reduce the frequency and it would increase the amplitude significantly, right? So you have to start understanding the correlations here between those greater amounts of compression, gravity, low frequency, high amperage, and then the difference in time passage. Because again, these tend to be the um, correlating factors, right?
So let me ask you, and I don't know the answer to this. Is space ahead in time or behind in time when they have to reset the satellite?
I don't know. I think that their time moves slower or something because right, if you go up there, then an astronaut is younger when he comes back. I've heard that, or is it the other way, or are they a little older? Did they age faster? I forget which way that goes. To be honest, but that would be the answer to that question. I've
Well,
never been to outer space, so I never had to really think about it.
no, either have I. So, yeah, I'm just looking at it in the way that if it moves faster out in space, right, it means it would be slower during the core of the Earth, right? So, if we magically had a center of the Earth, okay, and you say, okay, when we get past where we are now on the top of it, would it be slower? So, if they say the guy lived 1,000 years versus us living 100 years, right? Would it be 10 times the difference? You know what I mean? In reverse for them. I always wonder that when they talk about, old things and they say, this is the king's list, right? And they tell you the amount of years that they lived. Oh, this is a reign of 4,000 years. This is a 60,000 year reign. And we know there's some limitations on the human body, but we can extend them somewhat. But is it in a different era they're reigning from? That always was, something interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think again, this all comes about asking interesting questions is what this poses, right?
Hmm.
So then comes the question of so if your biological body, enters into a time dilation zone, let's say faster, okay? Well, does your metabolic rate follow suit? You see what I mean? Because is
Hmm.
like now all of a sudden the time is passing by that fast, but is your metabolism out of phase with that? Therefore, as soon as you enter into that accelerated time circumstance, you age quickly, but guess what? You're out of phase. So here you go, boom. Is that where an Ankh comes in? Is that to bring you into a phase or something like that? Or an Ankh, like you get it. I'm using it as an
Hmm.
example of something to bring you into a state of resonance and phase with the time dilation that you'd be entering into, where maybe it syncs up your metabolic functions at that point, because again, that becomes a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, how do I say this? They trying to think of the best way to say it. I think that if you're out of Schumann's resonance, okay, on the planet where we live, right, or the area we live, and then you go to the core, it may be different. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, and then your body would be completely out of whack. Like you wouldn't know which way is up at that point until it reset itself. So
Mhm.
yeah, you would need something to kind of change that to get you to put yourself um in that circumstance. That'd be
Right, right.
interesting.
It becomes like diving, right? So,
Yeah.
when you dive down, you go into a state of compression. Well, if you expand too fast, if you rise too fast, your gas expansion is out of sync with the rate in which you're climbing. So all of a sudden you end up with the bends, and because of the gas expansion. So, like it would have to be like some kind of acclimation or something like that in order to avoid weird and crazy stuff happening, just and which is interesting to think because if there's time dilation, either plus or minus, right, side of things, so it actually doesn't even really matter, right? Um, in space or on the moon or on Mars, and you're putting humans in that circumstance, they're still only traveling to that circumstance so fast. So there is a degree of gradient, probably is, although a small portion of time, some type of acclimation period, that your body would be subject to, right? But if you were to just spontaneously create a field that was at the same as at your destination, either plus or minus, and were to be exposed to that, how would that necessarily affect you? I don't know.
So okay. Well, that brings up another interesting thing. If we go from, the inside of the earth to outside the earth in space, if we're going to Mars and we created a field around it, would we want it to be just like Mars's atmospheric field? You know what I mean? To set us up to be okay when we get to that atmosphere. That because I don't think we really take that into consideration now. We just look at can we cause gravity, around the craft so that we can be normal in there, and then when we get there, because when you get there, our bodies are going to react in a completely different way in that atmosphere than they do ours. Not just the breathing aspect, but the frequencies and such. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's like I always felt like that was one of the most interesting circumstances about planetary gravity and the center of the Earth, right? Is the idea that, if you were to jump into a hole to the center of the Earth, right, that went straight through the Earth, you'd fall until you could fall no more. And, there's a place in the center of the Earth where you will be ever increasing in your the gravity density, the gravity put upon you, as the pressure increases and increases and increases, even if it's just in your ambient, you're in the hole that's surrounded by the ambient, you're still subject to it, right? So you'd end up in this circumstance where basically you're falling down this hole, ever accelerating faster, faster, faster. The more pull it has, the less density that there is to stop you. And then you get to this certain point where all the forces are pressing down on the same exact point, and you wouldn't be able to fall anymore because you just be there in the center. And it's at that point that all the forces would be pressing around you. But what do we know about gravity? Well, gravity isn't abundantly strong.
Yeah.
So even as strong as it's pressing around you, but now you're in a state of suspense simply because you're in the middle.
So
Um,
hold on. But
so what's time there though is the point. Is there time? Well, it should go that if time correlates with gravity, and the more gravity, okay, so that kind of answers it about space, right? Time correlates with gravity. The higher the gravity, the slower the passage of time, subjectively, time dilation, right? That when you're at the point of greatest pressure and energy potential and gravitational force at that point, that time would move the slowest. But like so at that point, at that very middle point, does time exist? Probably not. You see? how that goes. Like time, it plays no role there. It's just slowed down to the point where it's neither here nor there.
Hmm. So let me relate this to like a UFO we see, right?
Hmm.
If we're standing there and we're the observer and we see this thing and it looks like it immediately jumps, you know what I mean? Like across the world or whatever, but it's in its own time field. Okay. So you're saying that they have no time inside of it where they're at, but the field that we're observing is super fast in comparison to the field that goes around their craft. Did I get that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, or they could be at any point plus or minus if they break locality. Then at the end of the day, their gravitation, it's working off of a totally different cycle and time dilation cycle than that of the Earth because it's out of phase with the Earth, right? That's what breaks locality is that out of phase. That's what we always talk about with the differentials,
Mm-hmm.
right? So once you bring it out of phase with it, all of a sudden it becomes so unrelated that it's running on its own situation. And again, if you've broken gravity and now you're working off of your own gravity. So you know that to break gravity, you have to create your own gravity, right? Like
Right.
we talked about that.
Mhm.
That's the point. There has to be a gravitational potential of the object, which is why actually when I was doing that stupid cap trick, right, that got scary and it was sucking to the table, you know, everybody wants to see something float, but do you see the significance of something being stuck to the table really, really hard? Well, if it if I turn it off and it doesn't grab to the table that hard, well, there's a change. What's the change? Changes is gravity, right? It's pulling down to the table. So you're creating that. So now all you now all you gotta do is the second part, to separate it, or you keep
Yeah,
it in its own bubble
you
state.
you change the charge potentials in order to create a bit of gravity on it so it pulls down. Right.
There you go. So, that sucking effect is stage one of anti-gravity because you just manipulated gravity. And what happens when you manipulate gravity? You may manipulate time. Now, what happens when you're in an ambient field? It hasn't broken locality. You've created gravity. You've manipulated time. Well, all of a sudden it starts to fall out of phase and in phase and out of phase and in phase with what? With the resonance that it's at, right? Which is exactly funny enough what I observed, right? When the thing just seemed like it was here and there and right in the middle all at the same time. And so sort of was the surrounding environment just doing this. Like, but it was multiplied, and it was very strange. And I did not like it. It was scary.
Okay,
And
so
that's
hold on, hold on.
the
Let's go back to the observation point. So
yeah.
you're seeing it like a blurred image in your eyes, right? So as you're looking at it, because this kind of goes with the UFO thing. If it did go out of time, then you would observe it as more of a blur until it went out of your actual I don't know how you want to say that word where you can actually see it.
It's like and the radio is a great example of this, right? So it's like if you're tuning a radio with a dial where you hit that sweet spot, it's like crystal clear, no distortion, right? And as you start to turn the dial in either other direction, you'll start to bring in some static to it, but then you'll start to like lose it in and out, but you'll still have it, right? It's still there. It still have it. It's like, you can identify the song, you know what the song is, but it's kind of skipping all over the place. And then it's fuzzy on top of that because it's just being distorted. That's what brings something out of phase literally is. It's just tuning it to something that isn't in its ambient. It's not in tune with its ambient environment anymore.
So we draw a connection between time dilation and phase dilation then?
Oh, well, or phase like
Shift.
phase modulation, yeah, phase
Okay.
modulation, yeah, absolutely can. Yep.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
that's one way to see the effect. If you start to see it, go blurry on you, and you're in there.
Well,
The
super high voltage mixed with a pretty high frequency, you know put into that situation where it's hitting quartz repeatedly over and over and over again in an encapsulated environment, does things. And yeah, it is like phase conjugation. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's always interesting when you think it through, you know what I mean, versus what's observable to you, how easy it is to put the parts together. You know what I mean? Not physically make it, but I mean, just think about how it's working for you.
Yeah, exactly how it is. And and that's why I said it's extremely hard to show. Because Deadfish just said, like his video, compress the time. He experienced one thing, he caught the whole thing. He experienced it as he was recording it that specific way.
Hmm.
Okay, but what got recorded to the phone? Hyper compressed, you know, ambient reality. You see, like it's probably easier to fool and bring your, you know, senses into sort of phase with what's going on, so you see it in like what's actually happening versus a piece of electronics ability to capture it. It might be more difficult to manipulate that, or possibly the other way around. But we usually see it the other way around. But maybe but it kind of makes more sense that that's actually capturing it for what it is, and your subjective experience is what's screwy, right?
Okay, so this goes in to the observer effect. You know what I mean? The experiment that we're looking at the laser and then seeing if it breaks apart and if they're standing there or not, or whether it's a camera, you know what I mean, sitting there. So is it anything like that? Because I would imagine your body comes into phase like a little bit of capacitance with the laser if it's weak.
Yeah.
Because a strong one would be no problem and go right through it. But if it's really weak, it should move it a little bit. You know what I mean?
I mean, like a wave function has something to do with everything, and I think that everything is relative in that regard, right? So, um, if you have a wave function collapse inside of a time dilation zone, the way that you're going to observe it inside that time dilation zone is inherently different than if you were looking into the time dilation zone from another ambient situation. That's what I think. So it, but what gets recorded is the question, right? And that's
Hmm.
kind of always been the question. Do you get the full thing because you were in the zone, or do you just get the compressed fragment because, well, that's in reality what happened as far as the outside the little bubble goes, right? Um, like it seems to be based on at least, and I'm not basing a conclusion on this, but it seems to be that what Deadfish experienced and what I experienced is actually, that's a pretty similar circumstance where the
Well, yeah.
experience and what you saw and so on and so forth just seemed vastly different than what was captured, you know. And then that actually goes into line with to what degree does the universe correct itself in this situation? Because um, if you, for instance, hit the record button and it's counting the time that you're recording, and you're sitting there recording for 2 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever, you see it counting 30 seconds, no problem. But what, as soon as you save it and step outside of it, it's different. You see what I mean? Like that's
Well, okay. So there's got to be some kind of factor where the field itself is messing with the field around your body. You know what I mean? Like it's trying to pull you into its resonance. You know what I mean? Something like that, where you're not in the same phase you're in now. That you're trying to move to its, and your perception of it is much different than what the camera picks up. Right? You think that might be the case going on there?
something to that effect. Yeah, I think it just has to do with, um, energy storage and how our electronics work and store memory, versus its relationship with that which it's like kind of created. It's programmed to do certain things. Um, And if you change the ambient environment, it doesn't necessarily know that. But then your subjective experience doesn't match it. It just gets super strange. This is what I'm saying. Like, I don't have an explanation for this. It just gets weird. And certain things are weird. And this has sort of been like, one of the big questions is about these paradoxes about time travel. Because mind you, something, whenever you're dealing with time dilation, there's a direct relationship to time travel with time dilation, right? And we always concern ourselves with these paradoxes, especially if you go back, right? Or if something, or so if you think about it, if you slow time down, okay, you're technically going back in time because now your timeline all of a sudden started moving slower than the ambient time. So every moment that passes, it's leaving you in the past. So you have, though you may not have traveled backwards, okay, you're now in a position where shit has already happened, okay, that you were not a part of.
Right.
And
Okay,
as
that makes
soon as
sense.
you kind of like step back out, you're going to get caught back up.
Mm.
So what happens? Well, bang, you get caught back up. So how does it reconcile? And this is what I'm saying. Like there seems to be, if you were to run with this idea, and again, this is super speculative stuff, right? But if you were to run with that idea that we're giving with uh, the video examples, and the time difference and so on and so forth, well, when you step out, it's got to correct you for that. And the correction is that, well, like this only took so long, but you experienced it just way longer, and you're not going to get that out here. That didn't happen here. Out here, it just happened like that. That's the
Mhm.
reality. If you were to gradually phase in and out, it would probably become a lot less apparent.
Yeah.
And almost seems subjective in nature, right? Oh, well, it felt like it was a long time,
So
right?
you're saying like it's a time anchor. It drops your anchor at that point in time, and then from that point forward is where you're going to move.
Well, yeah, but not necessarily an anchor with a drift, but yeah, like, you're still kind of going with the flow of the river, so to speak, but at a possibly in that case, at least at a lesser rate. Um, and I personally think that this happens in your biology all the time, with your consciousness and how it's received by your brain. I think that your brain has all sorts of different mechanisms, that legitimately create time dilations that we feel is subjective. Why something like waiting at the DMV online, you sitting there for 10 minutes, you're like, oh my God, how much longer? But you're doing something fun, and all of a sudden you look up, we've already been on for 33 minutes. See what I mean? It's like time just flies. So there's like this subjective experience thing. But how subjective is it really? Like, you're actually experiencing time at these rates within yourself. The thing is that it's just not, it's confined. It's confined to, your antenna. So it's not affecting the things in the ambient circumstance around you.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, something like that, maybe. Something like that, maybe.
Something like that, maybe.
Something like that, maybe.
That's probably the best explanation you can give to it until we get to the point where we have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But it's again, with these things, like, well, what causes these things and whatnot, like, and all the, like, you have to realize, again, when you talk about energy vectoring, there's only so many things it could be doing. That's
Well,
that's the big thing to keep in mind.
check this out. So it becomes mind blowing when you think about it. If it's tied to your gravitational field, that means that every solar system would be different in time, right? So, and then every planet in that solar system would be subject to a different time being around that sun or two suns, depending on how it is. That's like a whole nightmare scenario to calculate what you got going on there. So, as we see things now as the solar system is, or we see other solar systems, it may not be that way at all.
Dead on, and that is the point, is that, like, when you're looking at things from either Earth or even outer spaces, like the furthest reach that we have a sensor isn't that far, okay?
Yeah.
It just simply isn't that far, okay? And when you start to realize that if we have a sensor outside of the solar system, which we do, that doesn't really function because everything's shut down by the time it got there, right? You basically only have stuff in the solar system. But then you realize that you could be looking at this great expanse and all of your data from inside this bubble, okay, that is only giving you the inside the bubble information,
Mhm.
you know, and the reality of it is that once you leave this bubble, everything had long already passed and gone, way beyond the scope of what we're seeing, imagining, or anything in between. And that's why when they try to age the universe and stuff like that, it becomes hilarious and laughable because it's like, trying to, take a tape measure and measure something inside of a fish bowl. It's just like it's so distorted, that there's no realistic way to get an accurate measurement in that regard. There's not. So because you don't know what the ambient time dilation of the universe is to know how old anything is or how much time passed, you could just say it from this earthly perspective, which seems as good as we can do and relevant. How else do we
Mhm.
correlate? But that doesn't mean it's true or accurate. That doesn't make it true or accurate. That's
Yeah.
really what
No.
it boils down to. Like even the speed of light itself, what if the speed of light's literally something else entirely, or it's indefinite, right? Except the only reason that we think that we can measure it is because from inside the fishbowl, this is what it appears to be.
So like every solar system would have their own speed of time and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you change the speed of time, then you change the speed of light, don't you?
Yeah. Well, that I guess. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That makes everything infinitely more interesting.
Well,
When you
Penpop said that, the book that I tell everybody to read all the time. He said, all these things are so subjective, and they work off of basically a curved line, a couple of curved lines on a chart. And once you go anywhere away from these lines, things start to really get crazy really, really fast, like infinite speed of light. Oh, well, time, you know, uh, like distance compression, distance expansion, because like all these things are relative to time, which is
Mhm.
why any distance measure is usually made relative to time, like as far as speed is concerned, right? So we're talking about how fast something could possibly travel and how speed itself is intrinsically linked to time, right? The faster you go, you see what I'm saying at that
Oh yeah,
point. It
yeah.
becomes like a little bit of a wacky thing, because everything's to do with this time measure.
So well, change a little bit of the subject a little bit because I wanted to get into this. Is Jupiter, and they were talking about the core of it. I sent you the video on it. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it.
Yeah, I didn't yet, unfortunately, but I had to run right on here.
It was so interesting, and they were talking about the core of it, and that it had like not a solid core, like an iron core, like we would think of in the Earth or something like that. But they said it was like how do I say it? Like a mesh, and they showed rings around it. So different color rings going like this to a center core, but none of it was solid.
Well,
And
yeah.
okay, I was just trying to lay it out what it was. And they said that they were measuring it, so they brought a satellite around it and then mapped it. You know what I mean? The gravitational field around it to
Mhm.
see what they could find and see what's inside of it. The ironic thing is Jupiter and Saturn both being gas giants, they did the same thing. They came out to be equal in how they're building out, and the Earth and every solid planet would build out differently. So
I
they had to
agree.
change their
Yeah.
model.
That's cool. That's interesting. And so here's like my and this is something we touched on so long ago. I won't even refer back to, and well, we said it. It was a year ago when we talked about it. Now Saturn's made up of hydrogen and hydrocarbons. That's pretty much it. That's what you got. Now, when you start looking at the stuff like we're observing with Rav, right? And then you look at stuff like we kind of know already happens in, different pressure situations chemically. So, you got to take the physics and then realize that the chemistry has so much to do with it. What you start to realize quickly is that you could compress and compress and compress hydrogen, pretty dense, but there reaches a certain point where all of your hydrocarbons, okay, which are going to lie deeper than your pure hydrogen wells, okay, are going to break the chain of that. The hydrogen is going to return to the upper levels, and then your carbon is going to ultimately start to like meander under these high pressure situations. Now, it's not that there's no hydrocarbons or hydrogen in those innermost layers, but I really believe that based on the pressures and the fact that you're only dealing with hydrocarbons and that what I just said, that you'd be dealing with diamond structures in the middle of Saturn, and Jupiter for that matter too. It's pretty much very similar, if not the same. And probably like those node points that you're talking about that they were able to observe, which I have yet to see anything on whatsoever. It's the first time I'm hearing about it. It kind of starts to make a lot of sense with that theory as well, because who's to say that it forms traditional crystals in the sense that we're thinking? It could very well be forming macroscopic lattices of these crystals. You know, at the molecular, but also at the upper levels too. So it's not necessarily that it's a solid. Okay, it may not have like the heat, for instance. Okay, to actually form how a diamond itself forms. But what happens when you find out that it's a liquid diamond? Because it's literally just 100% carbon, more or less, that's formed in resonance with everything else around it and creating, macroscopic liquid crystal structures like an LCD screen, except instead of it being a silicon base, it's a carbon base and therefore a diamond as opposed to a quartz. See what I mean? So
Mhm.
you could basically have a liquid quartz crystal situation that would correlate with that observation.
Well, they just to be fair, they said that they couldn't map any solid structure on the inside of the gas giants.
Mhm.
But I think what you're describing is more like an Earth type thing where the crystallization and everything. I could totally see all that.
Well, remember that again, like I said, crystallization, what is it? It's just the relationship of molecules and how they structure. So if you have water does it too, and water does it great, which is interesting. It's why you can structure water, but why water also flows, but why water also sticks together, but then breaks apart. It's very similar to that, right? It's in this dynamic lattice. So if you were to take carbon into that same circumstance, carbon gas, and ultimately compress it into a liquid that then structures, that structuring is a crystal structure at that point because of structuring.
So
And
you're saying without
it can only form so many different ways molecularly. So
right
what's it
without
going to form? It's going to form a carbon crystal,
okay, but are you saying forming the crystal like it's a
not
butterfly
solid, no,
or just a lattice?
the lattice.
Oh, okay. So it'd be like the sheath. We always talk about the sheath in the rab. It would be the
Yeah.
same thing where it's creating a lattice around it.
Correct. Well, right. So because you're now dealing in differentials, because you're dealing with a carbon layer and a hydrogen, hydrocarbon layer. They have different attributes, different states of compression, probably different rotations, different densities. That's for certain.
Hmm.
And then then what's that lead to? Well, that leads to torsion because you're not going to have a zone that has higher density, higher compression material. Okay, going at the same rate as everything else around it. So it's going to go slower, and be more stable in the middle, and then the outside's going to be kicking ass around it. And that interaction between the two layers, like in the raft, right, is ultimately going to create a boundary zone between the two. And it's stabilized because it's consistent.
Well, so let me throw this out there. They show that Jupiter has, and I'm pretty sure it's Jupiter. On the top of it, it has a hexagon. Is that right? Or it was a
Yeah.
geometrical shape. Okay,
Mhm.
which would make sense to the lattice structure you just said. That
Absolutely, because it matches that of a diamond. It is
yeah.
a you're right, it's a cube. It's a cube, it's literally a cube.
Well, it's interesting because if it didn't have any solid layers in it, like actual solid layers of like planet or Earth, you know what I mean, dirt, kind of whatever you want to call it, then it just built out in the gas, the pressure, the maybe even plasma in the center at its core. You know what I mean? And then it built out that way. That means that the magnetic field itself is no longer contained inside of it.
Oh,
That
no.
it's completely outside, which would make a lot more sense, right?
Would
Why it's so
would
big.
make so much sense, and this ties right back into that conversation we had the first time around on it, which we're doing a better job this time, by the way. But that what does that mean? Well, that means that it's able to displace more solar radiation, okay?
Yeah.
Because the name of the game here for a planet like that, okay, the same as the or any planet for that matter, is how much hydrogen can you keep in? Okay, the more hydrogen you could keep into your planet, okay, the more atmosphere you have. Um, you know, if you don't have the high enough hydrogen potentials or whatever have you, it just get then you don't have the magnetic fields, right? If you don't have the magnetic fields to displace the solar radiation, the solar radiation is going to create hydrogen plasma and return that to energy state, and that's it. And then once it gets rid of the loose hydrogen, right? Then it starts going after your matter. So what ends up happening is it starts decaying the matter of its hydrogen potential, which is why you see these toasty dead planets are like almost totally depleted with thin atmospheres and very weak magnetic fields. Um, it's just because it's not holding any hydrogen in at that point.
Hmm.
It's all being in a state of depletion.
But it starts to make more sense when you look at gas giants and the way they're built, the magnetic field that comes out of them, and what we're looking at in the RAV and how it builds out, because it could potentially build out to what looks like a sun, but also it could probably form a gas giant. You know what I mean? As well, I guess depending on how you build it or what you put into it.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I think one of the more interesting things is you always talk about the water aspect and things like that. And I didn't really come around to it until I look at how, and this is different than you probably, but how you go from liquid state to a gas state in some of these things, right? And once you get over there and ionize them, you could go from the liquid to a gaseous state, and then you
Mhm.
can always form it together and go back. But I believe that those layers are found in something like Jupiter.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that at all. I mean, you got to remember that the number one reason that water is a great sign of life is because water is the hydrogen lock. You see, it's once you get that oxygen into the equation, right? That's what allows for the hydrogen cycling. So, the oxygen's highly reactive, right? The hydrogen's highly reactive. They're going to react with each other, in through combustion more times than not. Um, or various states of compression, willingly and often and sporadically and spontaneously. And then once you have that water form, it's locked in. You know how hard it is to get rid of water. You're like, oh, you could evaporate it, cool. And what happens? It kind of
Comes
condenses
back.
and condenses and falls back down. What a great way to sit there and lock that hydrogen potential into your planet. And what does that mean? Well, that means that your planet is extraordinarily resistant to that material depletion. Once you don't have to worry about non-organic decomposition, radiation decomposition, Well, now things that are organic can thrive, because
Right.
they could start to cycle that material in symbiosis rather than it be reaching a state of depletion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So interesting how planets work. It makes a lot more sense once you've seen kind of some of the formations and stuff of energy, and then how that builds out and builds out the layers. Then it starts to make a little more sense as you get into it, because now you're
Mhm.
saying, okay, all things are present, and they just kind of swap back and forth between what they are, but they can't get out of it.
Yeah,
You know what I
right.
mean?
It's very, very hard for it to get out of it. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh wow. But that so explains the gravity of something like Jupiter. But if it had like a planetary shell on it, would it be the same gravity though? So that's like say they had like a surface layer like Earth does. You know what I mean? That we're standing on or sitting, whatever you want to say it. You know what I mean? Would it change their gravity though? I'm thinking it would.
I mean, it does. I mean, first of all, anytime that you put something into centrifugal force, it's going to change its gravity.
But
Right.
okay.
So one thing has directly to do with the other, right? And we always say that when you bring all the vectors together, right, all the types of electromagnetic modes into some state of either equilibrium, and I want to actually, it's a good segue to one other thing that I've always called it an asymmetric equilibrium,
Okay.
which is the best way that I find to describe it, right? The thing is that it's not really an equilibrium state. It's actually a non-equilibrium state. Um, that's stable, a stable non-equilibrium state. And that's probably more accurate, to be honest. Um, the reason that I say that is because you have two different amounts of something, and you're keeping them separate from one another, right? And then you're having them go into a stable state that keeps them where they are, but they're actually not an equilibrium, because equilibrium is actually more representative of entropy, right? Like normal entropy, where something goes into a state of equilibrium. How do you do that, right? By mixing your colored marbles together. When you have 10 red marbles and 10 blue marbles mixed together with each other, and it's in randomness, then it's in a state of equilibrium. That's the zero ambient at the point, right? At that point, right? Is that
Mhm.
perfect mix between the two. But the mix is what you want to try to avoid to be able to get anything that we're talking about, right? You actually want to cause the separation and coexistence of things on two separate sides.
Okay, so let me try to relate this to magnetism, if I can.
Sure.
When you rotate a magnet, you get fields that build out, and then at this point, they drop off in energy level, right? And then they go on, and then they hit another level, and then they'll drop off again.
Hmm.
So it's non-equilibrium because it gets to this level, and then some seeps through to the next level where this level stays where it's at, right? So then the other part seeps out to another level, though it's less energy. You know what I mean? It'll keep
Yep.
going like that. So would that be a non-equilibrium state?
Well, I mean that's sort of it. Everything's similar because it's all related, is what I'm going to say. I don't know that that's the same though. And the way that I kind of described that in the past, I mean, I kind of do stick by that, which is if you think about it as like a fractal equation, sort of like Fibonacci, if you were to like, look at it as a whole breaking apart, it's going to reach a state of diffusion, right? That it can no longer have the density levels needed at that particular layer, you know, for that separation to continue. So what it ends up doing is it recoalesces in reverse. And when it recoalesces in reverse, that uh, how big the piece is to start, right? So to speak. I think this is the best way to imagine it. How big the piece is to start is deterministic of how big your throw is on something, because you could break that big piece into more smaller pieces before it reaches that Planck scale of diffusion for it to then start to recoalesce on the other side. But that's what is going to give you your sphere. okay, is that point, that initial amount broken down, recoalesce. Now, what happens when that then stabilizes? Well, your initial hole, okay, doesn't just stop there. It starts riding and breaking down then again across the next layer, okay, and does the same thing, but now there's just like less of the hole, right, to work with. So then that becomes your next layer, except that layer is less magnetic potential in that case, right, than the inner one. And then it'll do it again. And it'll just keep on recoalescing through the same center point, same central axis point. As far as how the field geometry works.
Hmm. I Sorry, Maker was asking where's the null zones. We were talking about a spinning magnet. So how I says it, we obviously know the center of the magnet. If there's a hole in it, it'd be right there. If there's no hole in it, it's still going to be right there. But I was thinking more like a test that I did that had 4 magnets on it, and they were like 2 inches long, half inch by half inch. You know what I mean? And then the center core that goes to it, and that's obviously where the null zone would be. And then you spun it. I spun it at about 7,600 RPM, and it would build out and tell you where they were. But I knew the field was going around and back into the center because of the way the magnet's built out, where you could go directly where it lined up. I'll do it this way, where here's the magnets, and they had this thing that was like this long. Right here was where my null pulled in. So this area in here would change versus the area going this way or all the way around. You get what I'm saying?
Right, right. It would become transaxial at that point. I mean, that all becomes like, it depends again on your initial field geometries and configurations as to where these things happen. Um, I mean, listen, if you're already taking into consideration that there's a spiralytic, energy potential, that has to do with any given magnetic field. Now you're taking multiple of them and you're rotating it to create a greater whole of a magnetic field, or magnetic flux. That again, that becomes so dynamic that you could have multiple dynamic null zones, and one shared central null zone. The thing about the dynamic null zone is that if it's constantly changing its location based on the geometry and layout of the initial configuration, you know, it becomes simply, almost sort of like a moot point a little bit. Like maybe if you were able to observe the field for exactly what it is, like, with one of those sheets or whatever like that, you might see very briefly, very, very briefly, you will never see it, but if you could, right, you'd see that null zone pass, and then whatever. But then you'd see your central null zone between them all because it's the cumulative whole. And that's the same as bring all those uh, coils, right? That you have your one that's set up, and then you have all your secondaries set up around it. It's the same as bringing them all into resonance, and then having their fields ultimately build out to grow into that one larger circumstance. It's the same exact thing. Each independent one has their own geometry and thing going on, but together they also form this greater whole. In that case, you're just simply not spinning it, so it becomes more tangible.
Hmm. So we got a question. Do you subscribe to the concept of magnetic field lines of force and dielectric lines of torsion?
That's right. That's exactly it. And we were talking about the torsion effects on that before too. And again, it all works off of differentials and vectoring, which it's like doing this week after week and I love it, and I'll never stop doing it as long as you do it. Okay, but it's pretty fucking repetitive.
No,
Like I mean, yeah, like you could say the same, like, and they call them catchwords or whatever, but no, it really does boil down at the simplest levels to these very few things. So realistically, what is it to get what you want out of the woo stuff, right? Well, it's just to gain an understanding of what the code is, you know, of the vectoring and the proportions. You know, once you have the vectoring combo, well, then you need the proportions combo. How much of each? You know,
Well, I think everybody just kind of wants to know the layering too.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, it's all
just
relevant. It all goes to the greater understanding.
yeah, because they want to understand magnets better, and I think they rightfully understand that if you can understand that a lot better in a lot more in-depth terms, you can start to understand the universe a little better. And
Well, yeah, it's like I said about magnetic fields, is that what you think of as magnetism when you're playing with magnets is how it works. Okay. But as soon as you enter into the inner geometries of the fields, okay, there becomes an inverse relationship. You know, and realistically, we generally experience most um magnetism, right? With materials that only give you access really to the outer field geometries. You never get to play inside those inner fields, right? But we live inside the inner field of our magnetic field, right? We're inside of it. Um, it becomes an inverse relationship as far as what north and south poles do in relation to each other when it comes to the polarity. Once you crest into the magnetic field as opposed to subject to the outer magnetic field. So it's just something always to sort of bear in mind when you're imagining these things. Um, you know, and this is how like the locked positions occur. This is how the geometries form. This is how the collapses occur. Because positive, you know, I was going to say positive and negative. I guess you could look at it that way. But you know, north and north repel in a magnet, and south repel, right? And the opposites attract. Okay, but as soon as you enter into the inner parts of that field, it becomes the inverse of it, and then you have a simultaneous situation where your north pole, you know, is attracting to the north pole, you know, or I'm sorry, the other way around. You know what I mean? So you basically have the situation where the poles that should be attracting one another in the center, the north and the south, if you were to press them inwards, they're actually repelling. Okay. And then as soon as it goes up, it starts to fall out of that inner zone and starts to repel. Right. So then what does it do? It finds that equilibrium point and then it becomes locked. And that's the creation of where you don't have the magnetism in between those two poles.
it's like an ozone.
It is a null zone. It's
Okay.
exactly what I'm saying. Not like a null zone, it's a null zone.
Okay.
But that's the mechanism as to why. It's because the inner field works inversely of the outer field.
Right, right.
So
No, I understand. Like a tornado kind of thing.
mhm.
So I think when he was referencing Ken, because some of the how do I say it? It's almost like a stagnant field when you see the thing under his little microscope. Okay, the thing he uses to see the field, right? There's no movement in it. Okay, but then when you create the null zone between the two magnets, there's movement in it, right? But I don't think you could capture the full movement of what it's doing. So I always look at it in my Tesla coil when I create the second one, how I get that null in there. You put the light to it, there's like nothing. Okay. But then I know that there's energy and it builds out like this on both sides. And that's how I know that there's that torsion field going on in there. You know what I mean? That's just how I see it in my head because I deal with a coil, but in a magnet, it would be a little bit different. You'd have between the two magnets that form in the center and then pull it, to each one of them.
Yeah, no, that's true. And then when you scale it up, and then you look at like Rav, and then you look at like gas planets and or the sun, right? It becomes the same, but like at a much larger scale, where those torsion fields like really are the main factor, of separation. And again, it all works off of differentials. The density and gravitation and because of the density, you have a speed differential. So all the differentials change to these two extremes. And once that happens, you have two things working against each other incompatibly, but in sync with one another, proportionally
Well,
in sync.
let me, because I think I have the answer to this one. So just bear
Yeah.
with me on it. It's those torsion fields that we're talking about, the up, the down, right? You can say positive, negative. You can say constructive,
Well,
deconstructive. Okay.
when I say torsion, I'm talking about the wall that
I know.
occurs between differentials. But yeah,
Just hear me out.
I'll
Okay.
hear you.
Because it forms a field that goes on the outside,
Mhm.
and that in itself spins. So we're looking at speed of magnet spinning, which is incorrect. It's the torsion fields that are spinning. Okay. That's what's causing what's going on here. So you'll get them to build out, and they build out in a energy state and then a magnetic state. You know what I mean? And different things. Okay. So just the key to anti-gravity is the null zone, but you have to understand why. It's those two fields right there that get pulled apart and sucked together. It's that action right there that causes your gravity.
Yep.
It's a compression decompression of that particular zone that causes it. So when we look at, say, like the gravity flyer as an example, the only way to make that thing work, and this is why everybody struggles with it, is the piezoelectric disc must force that zone to compress and decompress. But because they're building out in fields that go like this, right? And I just mean that just as energy, non-energy, energy, non-energy. Well, you're going down with sound, and it has to be energy, non-energy, energy. So the two energy levels have to sit on top of each other so that it forces it to do this. That's the only thing that it does. But that's
It's a lot.
pumping the gravity.
Now you see the entire point. If you've been following the things I've been saying, why I initially talked about, I was just talking about how like the poles, change and
Mhm.
become inverse relationship and lock, because at that point, right there, that's exactly what they're doing. They're pushing apart here and they're getting accelerated upwards only to get then out of their zone and accelerated downwards. But at that state of equilibrium, it's just in a state of pump. It's just in a state of pump. That's all it's in, is a state of pump. That's where it all happens. And um eh, it happens in RAV. It happens in a magnet. Okay, but again, in what usable sense? You see, the density levels aren't high enough. Magnetism's strong, but it needs something to press on in order for that null zone to be activated, so to speak, right?
Okay, so let me throw this out there, Joe.
Yep.
This is what's going to get people. It's always in the center of mass that you're going to get that zone. Okay, so no matter where you hook it in on the outside of it, it always builds to the center of mass. Okay, so it's confusing when you look at it. If I say a coil to another coil, where's my center of mass? Right dead in the center of that coil. But if I say a disc, where's my center of mass? Right in the center of it. Okay, that's the difference. Now it doesn't have to be circular, it doesn't have to be round, it can be flat. It's where the center is. Okay, that's what has to be compressed. So you say null zone, how does it build out another thing? This was the trick. No matter how I did it, no matter how I took any wire from the center of my Tesla coil upon anything else, I never found the null zone that wasn't in the dead center of everything. Everything. Anything I hooked it to, dead center. Okay. It didn't matter if it was a Rodin coil. It didn't matter if it was a flat plate. It didn't matter if it was another Tesla coil. Everything built to the dead center of the mass completely. So you say, well, how do I find the null zone in it if I'm doing with the gravity flyer? Well, it was simple. It built out right in the dead center, no matter what you did to it or how you hooked it in. So that center of that plate was the dead center of your mass. And that's why that thing was angled directly on it.
All right, let me ask you a really crazy question, right? Well, it's kind of a statement before a question, so you could even understand what I'm trying to get at, right?
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So everything that's like, as far as like either energy creation, okay, or using energy, okay, has to go through a rotational phase. Okay. So if you take your mind out of the electromagnetic world for a second, electronics and so on, although that there's truth there too, but it's overcomplicating it. Think about a mechanical system, right? Rotation is pretty much the key component to make anything work. You could
Hmm.
change that rotational energy into anything. But what's the deal with rotation? Well, it's two-dimensional. Plain and simple, rotation is two-dimensional. It's this. That's it. So no matter how you cut it, it's that. Well, this is where things get weird and fascinating a little bit, right? When you're driving a car, okay, and you turn your stroke into your rotation through a camshaft, have your rotation. Okay, that's a 2D rotation. Then you go and you turn that into, another rotation, right? And then another rotation of the wheel. Now, these are all 3D things. But what drives the car? Well, what drives the car is the rotation, but of two surfaces, flat surfaces connecting at a point, okay, with a repeating pattern because of the rotation. So linear motion, okay, of like a motor vehicle or a boat or whatever it is, even though you could steer it around and it's a 3D object in a 3D environment, it's a 2D mode of transfer of force. Okay. It's a 2D mechanism. Okay. But yet almost everything mechanical we work on runs in two dimensions for that reason, because it's just the interaction of two surfaces. And that allows for the action to occur. Even if you're thinking about a drill drilling through a board, it's still a two-dimensional process. It's happening fast and it's happening in 3D because as it spins, it's burrowing and there's depth, right? But it's still a 2D process. Well, once you realize that, once you get into upper dimensional forces like, you know, uh, electromagnetism, okay, and then that rotational force, that once it reaches a certain point, it will start off in 2D because these are the realms that it always exists in the simplest forms. In lower dimensional circumstances. This is why, like static, for instance, what's static? That's it's 1D. It's literally a point of activated potential with no vector, right? So the idea here is that you're upping the dimensionality of your vectoring. And once you understand what the correlation is between certain geometries, okay, of certain motions, okay, and then it's upper dimensional effects when you're enticing, you know, uh, energy potential, into these different geometries. Now you start to understand the work that it's doing up above, which is why, um, if you want to take to the sky in this way, that you have the full control of up, down, left, right, this, that, the next, right, without exploiting like you know, two D's two ways, right? Helicopters work. You could hover in a helicopter, right? Except if you just have a helicopter with a top rotor and nothing to keep the body from spinning around, well, then the helicopter doesn't work so good. That's just sort of how it goes. So what's the difference there? Well, now all of a sudden you have two D. That you see how you exploited it there, right? It's funny because it's true, right? So you take these two D vectorings, and that gives you your third dimension to allow you to do it, right? This is just trying to simulate that. Okay, so once you kind of get your head around this idea, um, that it's all about upscaling the dimensionality, it becomes a lot easier to imagine how you might do that.
So goes into vector direction. I always talk about. Just hear me out. When I took the gravity flyer and I took the top plate, right? And it could be the bottom one, it didn't matter. And you put the energy onto it and you just touch it, right? So here's what it does, Joe. It goes around the plate and goes in and swirls to right to the center and stays right in the center like this. Okay. Just understand. So when you do the bottom chart, it does the same thing in the opposite rotation and goes to the center, right? Where's the point of movement? Well, anytime that you move either the top plate and compress and decompress, now you're pulling it up. You're not just pulling the little bit because you create a bubble around it. You're pulling the entire mass up with it. It's the force of that mass is now working in your favor. It wants to reach a point up here where it thinks it needs to go. So now it's lifting. That was the whole point of this whole thing. Everybody quits at the high voltage because they don't see the next level of where it is and how to get that, just that little bit of movement. But it has to be in sync, you know what I mean, with what you're putting out in the center. That's it.
Right. So check this out, right? So we know, right. So I just said before, static is a one-dimensional thing. Okay. So what's a current? Well, a current is a two-dimensional thing. And what can you do with a current once you have that? Once you're able to move these points, right? Now all of a sudden they're moving on this line. Okay, cool. Right. Now you have a current. Well, what happens when you take the current and you bring it around? Right. Well, then it starts to build something, right? It starts to build in dimension in this magnetic, field. So if you just have a circle, right, it's still a current. But as soon as you bring that circle up, and now it's repeating, and it's repeating, and it's repeating. Well, now all of a sudden, it's not a circle anymore. It's going to fall into a sphere, which brings it up in the dimension. And this is why coils create magnetism, why magnetism is well, is initiated in a 3D sequence and collapses into a 4D form once it's said and done. And that's what energy vectoring's direct relevance, right, to dimensionality is. But because we're talking all about these things that we know, right, in context with spatial dimensionality, right, it becomes pretty clear that once you start to bring them all together and they start to feed one another, that's your most efficient system. And it's those efficiencies that allow for then additional vectors that you're not really seeing or necessarily seeing the effect of, right? That have a grand effect on the overall scheme of things. Like once you realize, and we've said this before, that once your sphere, just this cresting sphere, connects in the middle, which why does it do that? Well, what I said before, you increase the density level enough, well, it starts to do what it naturally does, push in. Well, what happens when the poles want to connect, but then they get repelled because now they're inside instead of out? And now that's how that forms. That's how it's sustained, is these inner geometries. But when that occurs, what does that then create? Well, it creates eddy currents, all around the inside that then not only feed that toroidal flow, okay, but also have these counteractive torsion mechanisms that occur. It's like it's simple, but it's mind blowing in how complex it actually gets, and the realization that if you're then able to introduce your lower dimensional forces back up into this, how you could actually start building, because it's like I've always said about dimensionality, the higher dimensional stuff doesn't play by the rules of the lower dimensional stuff. The lower dimensional stuff is always subject to every rule of the higher dimensional stuff, right? Who could see through the box, right? Like, can you see through the wall of a house? No, right? But if you're in 4D, you could see through the wall of the house and everything else for that matter, right? That's how that is. So that's how these things work. They want to trap the energy inside. They want to get the higher energy density levels. You see, they want to because they can. and then apply that to the world around you, because that's exactly the world you live in. That's it. Like, look around you. It's there everywhere.
So funny.
Yeah.
See, I remember. Oh man, I'll throw a little secret out there for people on that Grab Your Flyer project. When Sean pulled in the energy from the ground by reversing how his coil worked, just by putting it a little bit down the center. Okay, just check this out. It's one of the funnier things that I've ever seen because I knew it did it before it did it. And it was because, remember how I tell you touch the light and then, or you ground the light on one side and you run into this one wire of energy and it pulls it through. It gives it a conduit to go through. It matches the same thing. So when I tell people, hey, the ground is giving you more energy, they never understood it. They think that no, you're just lying. There's no way you're grounding it out. You're pushing the energy into the ground. Well, it's the exact opposite. I'm creating a pump to pull the energy in.
Oh yeah.
The energy state in that bubble grows by where you place it on the ground. So if you have it up in the air, you're wasting your time. You're just wasting your time. So, and you only notice it once the potential gets high enough that it starts to affect the area around it. And then everything inside it electronically changes because you get a high voltage bleed effect. Then everything in there will start tuning itself. It's insane how that worked. Like it just started that, like the motors would pull into the right speed, right? And then you would start to see everything of the energy potential in it. It would start to raise the inner potential, and you start to see this thing shake. Okay, people thought, "Oh my God, you just think you have everything in balance." No. That's turned on with a perfect balance. It starts to shake because it's mechanical resonance that's going on.
That's right.
There's just a different aspect to it.
So with the ground thing, it goes back down to the anode and cathode effect. It just has to do with the draw, right? So when you have like these higher energy potentials and stuff like that, which like any sort of current being jammed into a ground would be, right? So you have this high concentration of energy, okay, being dumped into this large thing of much actually higher potential but lower density. Okay. So what ends up happening? Well, it's like a siphon effect. You're creating a pressure differential in that case, right? So what ends up happening is you end up with a draw. Well, what's a draw? Well, a draw is a feed, right? If you're just taking like current, you're dumping it into the ground, because something faulted. Well, that's fine. That's how that works, right? But when you sustain it, okay, and actually, sometimes less is more in that case, because you only need to break the threshold of what the energy density level of the ground itself is in order to start the feed. If you blast it all at once too, like too quick, like you probably get a lesser effect, frankly. But when you draw it up, all of a sudden it's the same as the siphon. So now you're pulling all the energy potential from the ground because you've created a vacuum. There becomes an inverse relationship where there's a feed, okay, but the feed doesn't want to go anywhere because it's not connecting to anything in particular, but it's being able to draw it all in. Only when you connect that to a similar type of energy potential does it complete the circuit, which for purposes of grounding things is, I mean, and that's how a lot of this stuff works. This is why it's like going to the water line, so now you can complete the circuit once you get into the water line because the potential levels go up so much. And now you have a totally exterior circuit to what you were initially working with. And it's able to feed off of that through the anode cathode relationship. The same exact thing, the draw and the pull. It's just an exchange. They both have something to give each other, at the end of the day.
So let me say this, Joe, and I'll say that your third dimension analogy really hits home. And I'll tell you why. You got rotating disc, and a flat disc, right?
Mhm.
You don't get that third dimension until this one pushes down.
Damn right. That's it.
And then it pulls this one up. And why is it pulling that one up? Because anytime you rotate magnets, it's the ground.
So
It's your
oddly,
grounding.
you okay, so that's a 4D thing, but now if
I'm
you
saying you have
wanted
to pull the 3D to get to it, though.
so like a helicopter, okay? If you and this is how RAV works too, by the way. And this is what I was explaining when I was talking about the energy exchanges and
Mhm.
how it's when the connection's made that the vectoring changes, crosses, third vector, etc. Right? It's all similar and the same when you start breaking it down into its smallest parts. Um, the, the idea here is when you have two parallel fields or lines, and they're here, okay, right? It's that's going to stay 2D, but it could build to 4D, to 3D, then 4D. It can. And over time, it will if the density levels are high enough and the field interaction is enough, because the field interaction will then be the thing that crosses and creates the third vector is the fields, right? But if you want to instantaneously do that, although in your context it will not function as desired, but the idea is if you wanted to immediately create the third, rather than have them parallel, you just have to put one this way and one that way, just like a helicopter. You know, when you do it that way, then you immediately have three dimensions once they're in relationship with each other. That doesn't make it more effective and it doesn't make it good for the cause, but the idea is the same as the helicopter.
But I think it has to do with the energy and how it's flowing
Mhm.
in in the dimensionality that you're creating, though.
Correct.
That's a difference there.
Well,
Is
that's where the
the
functionality comes in, absolutely. So,
yeah,
just because you're creating that the extra dimensionality doesn't mean it's doing what you want it to do.
right.
Right. So, and that's where the nuance of the engineering meets the science of it, and that's entirely the point. Um, Once you understand that the field interactions themselves are capable of working both with and for each other, and that over time that will build into what works with each other will stabilize. What works against each other will stabilize it inversely, and then you will get your third dimension, and then again over time it'll make that other connection because again they're finding their equilibrium between their interaction zones. Those interaction zones act as torsion zones. They'll beat each other up until they start working together. If they're super out of sync, they'll never fall into sync.
Oh
You
my
know,
God, dude. You got to understand what's going through my head right now. When you pull different energies in at different levels, they self layer.
Mhm.
They're self layering. It's
That's
like the plasma
absolutely.
in the RAV. Yeah. So when I say static, it'll self layer at a certain point, and then magnetic will layer at a different point inside of it, right? And the higher potential will go to the outside, right? But that also means it creates that diffuse zone, okay, or the zone where they're both combining together on the outside of it. So,
So hold
well,
on. Let me
let me just finish it
finish.
just real quick. The gravity flyer, the reason people never get to achieve anything is they haven't moved to the third dimension of it ever. They're only in two dimensions. Go
Let
ahead, Joe.
alone the fourth, right? So now let me ask you this: why does the higher potential go to the outside? I mean, the answer's right there.
Well, it has to do with how the energy builds out because high voltage builds out, obviously, in the dielectric. You know what I
So,
mean?
so check this out. The higher energy potential goes to the outside because it's still subject to dimensionality, which means surface area.
Hmm.
Okay. And in order for the higher density to achieve any sort of um, non equilibrium separation state, to become more similar to the inner field, it has to go into a greater state of diffusion, which means that higher density, okay, larger area, okay, would ultimately reduce its potential, okay, in any one spot, which then makes it more like that in the center. So it'll zone out until it equalizes. It's that equalization that allows for the correlation, right? Because that's coherence. You see, this is how it goes.
So it builds out a little bigger and then it sucks it back in and then tightens up the fields. Yeah, we've seen it. Yeah. No, we saw the whole. I guess we could show the video. It's been long enough. If you want, I put that slow motion one in for you.
Doodle?
It was just interesting how it built out. Probably a reason we're seeing all this that everybody necessarily doesn't right away. So this is our rev, and I slowed it down. But you can see it's starting to form. Right there, it goes bigger. And then boom, pulls right back down. So let me pause it. Right here. So this is so cool when you look at it like this. We have a lot of the purple on the outside. We're starting to form the layers of it now. It's already starting to spin. We've already got past that process. We're going into the temperature, it looks like, in the plasma itself. As we go forward just slightly, I'm just trying to go just a tiny bit at a time.
I really like this video because it has so many shots of what I've been describing. Perfect, that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see how it goes parabolic, okay? Now, if you look at earlier frames, what you end up seeing is that it's zoned out, okay? And how's it zoned out? Dimensionally, okay? It's got this rotational bias that's occurring that you could observe, and in this case, it's counterclockwise, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And as that builds, what you see is that it starts to sweep, and you'll see it zone out where one part is absolutely flat against the clay, okay, and one part is starting to build up. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that it went from searching the surface of the clay for electrons, okay, for all this potential. Mind you, what the electrons in this case is analogous to the static. Now, I'm not saying electrons are static, although kind of maybe they are, right? So, but it's like it's looking basically for all this free, loose, unvectored shit, and it's picking it up and consolidating it, right? And as it does this and it's moving about doing it and builds in density, certain parts of it, when it's zoning out, start to swoop up. They start to come up in dimension. You see, they're no longer stuck to the surface doing this anymore and accumulating it on the surface as some kind of purpley haze that's flat. Right now, it's starting to pull it up. Well, once it starts to pull up, you could see it start to curve. Okay, and how is it curving? It's curving in relation to its rotation. So in this case, you can see it's asymmetric. Okay, it's off to one side. All right, it still hasn't formed, but it's still counterclockwise. And aside from that, the swoop that occurs, it literally pulls up and then wraps around and sucks in. And it's as soon as that wrap completes, basically one rotation, that it's able to pull up in one rotation. That's it. Third dimension built, boom, falls. And when it falls, well, that's it compressing into the fourth dimension. That's when you get your zones, but it's also when you get a additional vectoring energy that occurs inside. And we're describing it at this point because we've kind of hit a little bit of a snafu, so to speak, between us and our opinions of it, with whether or not there's a center, a center axis like of a torus, right? We've kind of hit a little wall on that, and we'll call that speculative at this point, right? But what it definitely, creates is these internal convection currents.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a fourth dimensional process. And these internal convection currents, again, is a fourth dimensional process. So that's it going into 4D, no matter whether you want to believe it's got a center thing or not. And those convection currents, by the way, are in my opinion, are the eddy currents that you would normally observe from what I described when there is a center pole. So whether there is one or isn't one is secondary to the idea that we know that there's this convection thing going on.
Mhm. So I just wanted to point out, if you look at the mirroring of it, behind it, the fourth dimensional objects behind it, the colors and everything.
Layered, layered, layered.
Yeah, just remember this picture, Joe, when you watch that video later about the Jupiter, because that hazy look right there you're seeing, it matches perfectly with what they're saying is in the center of it. So just kind of keep that in mind in the way that they're seeing it. And it
Will
kind
do.
of, yeah, it matches the rev, and you can go back to it and look at it. This is also kind of like a tool to see how things form. And as we notice, that little artifact forms right away. If this is correct, and you can say that this builds out like it, I think based on some of the gases that are around this, it could literally form out several more of them if there were other gases present at the time. And you might just have how a planet builds out in a gas giant in this way. That's just my personal opinion. No one has to agree with it. But that's just the way I see it going. And all the things are present in there. You have resonance in there, you have structure in there, you have plasma in there, you have the heat, you have temperature differential. Everything that you want to say, eddy currents, all of it's in this. There's not a part that isn't. And the self-forming is the best part of it. So this is the frame right before it self-forms. So you can see it, and then I love the color difference. Okay, so let's see. We go back, we can see the yellow build out, and then it builds out a bit more.
It's about
Come
to
on.
suck in, and this is it. You're going to get the boom, and that's it.
Yeah, you get the big. So it goes real big. Sorry, I'm trying to move it slow. And then perfect yellow. Oh my God, that's so nice.
And what's crazy is that when you get it running,
And you see it
like,
shrink. So it goes,
absolutely.
as soon as it hits that yellow state. Sorry, Joe, I don't mean to talk over you.
No.
As soon as you get to that yellow state in there, it then starts to pull together. You know what I mean? That's when it starts to suck in together, because you see the color change went from like a white to a yellow, and then boom, it started to suck in and become really dense. You could tell the
Really
density of it changed. Yeah,
Really?
right away.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying really dense. Like, like really dense. I'll keep on repeating it. Like, that is dense and hot and layered. And I mean, I don't know, man. Like, this is why I went from talking about anything that we were talking about, and I've always focused on this thing because um it's everything that you kind of need to know to be real, in my opinion. And be humble about it. I just certainly didn't come up with this, right? This was Sean's discovery that didn't, by the way, according to Sean, and I am yet to read the actual text, but my understanding is that the way he discovered this, the guy that wrote about it, he never even got it to work properly. It was an anomalous effect. Like, so, it's cool. Like, Sean literally took the time to figure out, okay, with these components, if I change the amount here or the situation here, how can I cause this? Right? That's what he did. And he figured out how to get these things to create religiously.
Oh yeah.
And like, I
Well,
could tell you, like, I could create them religiously, like when my shit's not broken. So
I want to tell everybody this, because we were just talking about creating that state, that third state, right? So just understand this. I'm going to remove this for 1 second. I'll put it right back up. When we're talking about it going like this, I want you to watch it as we slowly go through it, because you're going to see the size went from really big, you see it small, then the whole thing builds out and back. It's like a heartbeat. It's going to go back and forth, but it's compressing and decompressing at all times. You got to understand, that's what keeps this thing, going. That's what we're looking for in anti-gravity, is to create that in one direction. We want all that energy potential to go in one direction, not every direction. We want one.
So it's so good that you said this, okay, because this actually goes to a certain factor of it that we've never really discussed, okay? Although it was in our presentation, but it was so glossed over that it wasn't even funny, okay? Sean's photo heart measures of the RAV, okay, to determine its frequency, which was a direct correlation to its rotation, okay? That number, okay, it shows that it spins extremely fast. Now, in Sean's case as well, with Sean's, and again, I'm focusing on Sean's RAVs, um, it had a very regular type of light emission pulse, right? Now, the light emission pulse, okay, was in sequence, okay, with its rotational speed based on the frequency, okay, but was not one for one, or else the thing would just be shining light all the time as far as you or I are concerned.
Yeah,
It would
I
be
get that.
pulsing light so fast that you would not know that it wasn't pulsing light, just like LEDs or um, even halogen bulbs and stuff, right? They all pulse. That's how they work, you know. So in this thing's particular case, it it's working off of like a gearing system. Like it's literally spinning, but also pulsing at a resonant rate. Okay, that's in resonance with the spin speed. And
Oh, are
then
you sure that's not the beat
and
frequency?
it could be this is where I'm going.
Okay,
Is that
sorry, go ahead.
it's rotating, okay, but it's rotating at like 10,000 RPM or something, like or 100,000 RPM. It's something ridiculous, right?
Hmm.
Okay. That's its rotational axis speed, all right? But what you end up with is 1 pulse per second. Okay. So you get it. If it's spinning 10,000 times per minute, you end up doing the math and whatever it is, it ends up right in resonance with the pulse speed. It's directly analogous. Um, it's very interesting. I had to go frame by frame, by the way. Not even looking at RAV, looking at the wall, okay, that was around one of the experiments to see when the flash would come, and I'd have to count the frames in between when the flash disappears to when the flash comes. Because it's only like one and a fraction frame, from when it comes. And I was able to do that enough times to like get to realize that it's slightly faster than 1 pulse per second, which was directly related to the 104, what was it, kilohertz that he got.
Hmm. Yeah, you got from 94 to I believe it was 100 something.
Yeah. So
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 this just
every
brings
so
up
many spins, it's doing this pulse thing right in sync with it, but at a different rate.
so it brings us something interesting. Everybody says the frequency of the Earth is these low numbers, right, in the hertz. But I don't think that it is. I always thought that the frequency, the spinning and everything is in a very high level kilohertz, right? But because of the rotational speed of the Earth itself. Now, when you look at the beat frequency between each layer, now you start to get a different number, and it's a much lower number. When you get down to the 1 hertz, 7.83 hertz, it starts to make sense on why they're lower. Does that make sense to you? This thing pulses at a certain rate, but
Well, hold on, I'm doing the math right now as we speak. What's Schumann's resonance? 7.83.
I have to believe it is, yeah.
I mean, I know it's close. Let's put it that way, right? Because if you take 24 hours in a day, like our one revolution, right? 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and then 60 seconds in a minute would give you a hertz analogous, right? Is 86,400, right? So if you divide that by 7.83, which you know what, I should go 7.84.
But I don't
Okay.
think that's the math.
Oh yeah, no. to figure out like, oh no, it wouldn't be because that's per second too.
RPM times 60 is the hertz.
So, well, wait,
Okay.
but divided by 7. Okay. Okay, by 7. Okay.
But
I think I got it.
hold on, Joe. A beat frequency to the actual hertz is much different math.
It would
I
be
mean,
because it's an offset, right? So you
yeah,
need to know
yeah.
the
So
two differentials of the offset.
this is okay. Hold on, but this is exactly why Sheila was talking about the amplitude. Okay, but it's in the beat frequency that she's talking about. It's not in the hertz level. The hertz level will break down to the beat frequency, which is why you get the flower. Okay, this is the geometry portion of it. So I just want to show this because everybody can see the beat that we're talking about here. Okay, right? So it's in slow motion. So you'll see it form, and then it builds out and goes back in.
And you can see the flash at the great expanse. It's stabilized now. Yep.
No, it keeps doing it.
No,
It takes a little time.
What I mean by stabilized is like how much it's expanding and
yeah.
contracting. Yeah.
But that's why the beat frequency is different than the rotational speed. And I think that we will find the same thing in the Earth.
I agree.
So
Yep, there's that one other factor that's needed for the equation, and I mean, what's that factor? I mean, it could well be something to do with the interaction of our magnetic field and the radiation from space. Like it probably has to do with like that type of frequency, frankly, because
Mhm.
what else, that's what we're subject to, right? And there's probably a direct correlation. I agree with the rotation.
I just, sorry, there's a lot more to it. I don't think it's as straightforward as everybody says it is. That's all I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
And I know there's somebody out there that knows the math on it better than us. But
Oh yeah, listen, we never talked about this or postulated this in any which way. So we're doing this live. Sit there and think about all the variables that are probably in play, get the figures on it, and come up with that number, in like fairly short order, but definitely a correlation.
well, it's here's the thing. No matter what you think of what this is, what it is showing is everything that's going on in planetary structures, sun structures, stuff like that, because it all has to do with energy and compression and how they build out and stuff like that. So regardless of what you think it is, it's not lying to you about how it works. And it's telling you on a grander scale, it may work a little bit different only because it's so big than it would work and it's really small. You know what I mean? Those two work a lot differently because there's other factors that'll come into play with it as it grows.
I agree. And I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm following our train of logic of this conversation.
Hmm.
And it's sounding like you're starting to understand why I said, if you have the cathode and you have the hydrogen, it's different. It's starting to sound like you're
It,
like through the logic of our discussion, because
it's there, but it's still it contradicts something, so I can't clear it out yet. You got to understand this. It
I
makes
understand.
sense, but when you can see something built in a different way, it starts to not make sense. So you have to it's in those columns. You know what I mean? Is it possible? Yes. You know what I mean? Is it definite one way or the other yet? I'm not. I'm not there.
All right, so let's play with one idea before we move on from this, because we have lots of woo stuff to talk about, and we're an hour and 45 in. But if we're talking about pumping the ground, we're talking about potentials, we're talking about mass differences and differences, and all these potentials, and we're acknowledging the fact that we have the channel that builds, right? And the channel definitely is at least critical to the formation, right? So you have this element of it. Well, if we know that the channel is formed in the clay, then we know that the potential that it's drawing from, okay, is from that channel, which is of the clay. So who's to say at that point that the potential that it's sort of working in conjunction with, okay, isn't a stored up in it, once it's built to a degree. Okay, like I'm saying that wholeheartedly. Once it's built, if it's trapped inside, it's got that feed for as long as that feed lasts, right? And that feed may last a good long well while. Is sort of the point, right? Or the idea that there's always some potential for it to grab, okay, so long as the mass is larger than it, because again, it's a diffuse potential, and as long as it has something to pull from at that point once it's formed. See, it needs a certain degree of this potential in order to form, which is why the channel might be that critical factor. Okay, but the sustenance requirement may be way lower. All right. So then if you drag it off, at that point it's containing most of that feed. And there's still some availability for it to bring in and draw in through its creation of new plasma by the fact that there's still an anionic discharge, and that it's in relationship with a larger piece of mass. And it would be almost impossible to show that what I'm not saying is incorrect, for the simple reason that in order to have it on a surface that is less mass than it at that density level, you probably need something super light, like an aerogel or something like that, right? Like you would need something that's just simply that light. To show that the mass has what to do with it at that point.
Okay, hold on.
But actually, I'm sorry to stop, but I'm having a brainstorm here. Okay.
Go ahead.
Now, the good news is that if you were to have aerogel and try it, it's wildly temperature resistant. Okay, and you should be able to run the rab right on it without destroying the material. So it's not like running it on a piece of plastic where at 200 degrees external temperature and with a bit of a flare up here and there, it's going to, melt or whatever. But if you brought it onto aerogel, it would just be an insulator, which is exactly what it is anyway. But the mass would be so different. So if it was such a small piece of aerogel and you were to bring it onto that, the question is, does it require that mass at that point? And that's following the logic of our own conversation today. But again, now if you built it and gave it a feed of something different, is it different? Potentially, right? And sort of the idea, and
Okay, so let me throw this out there. I look at it as, let me tell you, eighth was probably about 30 minutes afterward. We'll send the link out. He's talking about if we can go to Discord afterward. I think he has something to tell us. I don't know that we can stay on long, but
we'll go on Discord for a bit.
Anyway, what I was getting at, I was talking about earlier about a magnetic field line and a kink in it to cause a rotation to create something in an open air environment. Okay, because we know that that's what plasmoids do. Okay, or not plasmoids, excuse me, ball lightning does. Somewhere in there, there's a kink or there's a cross line. There's something going on. Okay, that creates this, but that also means that there's a connection between the field line that has to be met all the way. You know what I mean? Whether the kink in it or how that occurred, it has to go all the way through. So it makes sense when you say anode, cathode has to always be there. Okay. So in thinking about it in the way that they're built, it could be that it's indirectly there that I didn't realize in the experiment. Okay. And I'll say it like this. So say, for instance, you have two pieces of clay and you got a rab running on each one of them. Well, what is it on? It's still on a steel plate, so it still has to evolve through the both. If I shoot them at each other, you know what I mean? Even if the clay is double or triple thick, it still has to go through both to create the anode and cathode, even if it's creating a rab on both sides of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I see what you're getting at. I'm still not there on the water thing yet, but because I think it's more of the environment around it, more than the water itself.
Right.
So But I'm
Well,
getting there with you, Joe. I'm
yeah,
getting
no,
there.
I hear, right. I mean, the logic was following, and I started like hearing you say things that was sort of alluding to coming around on it a little bit. But
Just
I'm
take your
not here to
time. You're
convince
fine.
you. I don't like the whole idea that I have, and it's not a reason that I'm stuck on anything. I don't want to say I'm stuck on something, but what I do know is that, like, okay, analogy. If you have a garage filled with just like old shit, okay, you could go into that garage and look around and be like, I'm gonna take this off of this and this off of this and this off of this, and I'm gonna make this, right? But if you don't have that garage and like you don't really have anything, right? Like to pull from, well, your options become a lot more limited, and whether or not you could put together anything productive, is probably a little questionable at best. Like, it's sort of like and giving it hydrogen is like giving it this garage filled with parts that it could just pull from. You know, um we know that the high density anode, likes the electron feed and needs the electron feed. Like that's part of how that goes, and the argument could be made, well, then it's recycled back in. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could be said that we just don't specifically know at this point. But the whole idea here that I'm putting at is once you add hydrogen into it and it's a continuous flow, it's like having a garage full of parts that every time you walk in, there's more parts. And it's like you can always just continuously be like, oh, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that, and all of a sudden, bang. What does that mean? It means, well, you have all these available electrons for transmutation. You have all these available electrons for potential fusion reactions at this point. And that's sort of what it comes down to, I think, right? Is, you know, if you whether or not it's a critical element in what we're at now, to think that introducing it at a higher and more efficient level that's moderated through our engineering, just seems, you know, it just seems like that's the way forward. That's all. So, I mean, we always look at the sun and we look at the gas giants when we're looking at RAV. We were talking about it earlier. We had no hesitation likening it to the sun or a gas giant. Um, and all of those are just pretty much hydrogen.
Mhm.
So, when you start to kind of realize that the main source of hydrogen is never going to be in the air for us, it's always going to be through that cathodic reaction, especially considering that it's always the cathode end of things that is the hydrogen production. If you were to just take an anode and a cathode, you put it into water, well, you get oxygen up one and hydrogen up the other. Hydrogen only produces at the cathode, which has always kind of been my part about it is like, that's, again, to what degree it needs it now. Okay. You know what? I think that that's a great point of argument to think that that's not something to increase or further exploit or introduce. That's where I start to get a little, like, I don't want to say argumentative over it, but like I start to stand my ground a little bit because there's a reason. Like
Well, let me just say it this way. I think in order to get another layer, you need another form of gas. You already have the hydrogen formed. I think it has to get to another form of gas to build it up bigger.
but you
That's just
have
my
but
thought
you
on it.
have other forms of gas though already. You already have oxygen, nitrogen.
But they're not building out in the layers that you need them to build out in. We're only seeing the two layers, and we're not getting to the third.
Well, the
Not
the
yet.
oxygen and nitrogen, their plasma is formed together, which is why you don't get either a nitrogen or a nitrogen or an oxygen colored gas, is because it's mixed in air and it's formed by the cathode as it's discharging. So you have you have that layer already, but it's not one or the other. It's both together because that's how it's formed. And it's like kind of Sheila was saying about like, how if you put all these different gases and stuff, in like a tube, how it sort of lights up like different colors, but it also like melds together and stuff. And she was kind of describing it. Well, that's sort of what you're dealing with when you start to make plasma of air, because the density of either the nitrogen or the oxygen, okay, there's always going to be a nitrogen bias off of that, and the oxygen's just kind of mixed in there. If you were to equal them out, then it would become another part, but it's just not at a high enough density at
So
20% or whatever. You know.
okay, so hold on. There's a layer of compression that goes on with the outer space component, which I don't think a vacuum chamber 100% gets when it comes to this. Okay, because we saw the experiment. I don't think it 100% gets it. I think that there's another layer to be added to this.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
and I don't think it's going to build out as big as we want it to until it does. And argue the hydrogen point all day long, not a problem. But I think there's another element that goes on, and I think it's going to grow elements as we get bigger. That's just what I'm saying.
Well, I
Seeing.
mean, most of the time, I mean, the writing's on the wall with that. I mean, generally speaking, there's helium introduced into this equation.
That's what I'm saying. If there's a
So, I mean, like, but right, and again, this is, we're a bunch of fools playing with nuclear fusion. Um, like, at least I know enough to know like the components and stuff. Like,
no,
'cause
no, I understand. Hey, I got to
but
throw this out there right now, Joe, real quick. Traveling Fools is going to be on tonight at 7:30 p.m. We'll be over there talking to them and seeing what's going on with James and the sphere that he has. Excuse me, the how do I say it? The shaft that he's got going on over there that could be alien or, you know what I mean? It could be just nuclear for all we know. But anyway, updates on that. We'll do the interview with him on Traveling Fools channel later tonight. Just
so
want to throw that out there.
that was first of all, I had a great time on that show.
That was
Bunch of,
great.
bunch of good people over there. But with James, his story started to gain some traction. There's
Oh yeah.
definitely a bunch of these like UFO channels that that's all they do is and those guys kind of annoy me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, but it's like they picked up on his story too, and it was interesting to hear them critique it, and it's also interesting to realize like how we took it. From like this like perspective of like asking like objective like questions like and things to help them out and like point them in the right direction or whatever, but they're just sitting there like haphazardly analyzing like, oh, I mean, how valid do I think this is based on the what I see or whatever. Like that's as far as some of these guys trains of thoughts go, which it's kind of cool, kind of sad, entertaining, but like mind numbing at the same time. We're
Well,
legitimately trying to help the guy out.
I pulled some video of these things and how they work in nature. And I don't know if they're valid or not, but I thought I'd throw them out there. And then also, he is getting a reading from his radiation meter. Okay. And he gave the numbers and everything. It's just interesting that at least that portion of it seems to be correct. Okay. He's definitely getting some kind of radiation. What the rest of it means, man, we'll have to find out where he's at with it.
I mean, listen, it's I'm skeptical of everything, mm, you know, especially things like that. But I mean, to go to the extent of falsing a Geiger counter is,
Yeah, I don't think he did that. I think it was
that's
real.
that's what I'm saying, Laura. Right? I mean, if you're falsing a Geiger counter, I mean, you're just taking things to and you didn't even have one, and it's like, you know,
Yeah.
and I hate to say it, but like usually if people are, and like maybe this is the genius in it if it is a hoax, and I'm not saying it is, right? But most people that find stuff like that have all sorts of opinions of it. This guy doesn't really have an opinion of it. He's like
Yeah.
more. He's just asking around, like, "Hey, what does everybody think, and what should I do, and can you point me in the direction so
Yeah. Yeah.
we can unravel this?" Like he's not making any claims.
Dude, I'm gonna tell you that radio test freaked him out. It looked like it really freaked him out, like in the
Yep.
way he started talking afterward.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. You don't get that radio doing that if you don't have something going on. Sorry. I've had that before. You don't. You don't. Doesn't
Yeah.
work that way.
Oh, I mean, not for anything. I mean, like, I think, like, things cool and all. Don't get me wrong. I don't want anybody to be like harmed in the process, especially if it's radioactive. But I mean, like, man, if I would have found that big dick in the desert, I'd have cut that thing open with a fucking sawzall already, like 10 times over. I'm just saying. It's like get one of
Do
them
you,
big old small tooth Milwaukee blades. You put it on full, like, and that's it. It's funny to think, you just like, take a piece of like high tech alien future technology and then you cut it in half with like a sawzall.
well,
Like, what's the irony in that?
I would check the size versus the weight of stainless steel and just have an idea if it was solid or not. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could get a good idea off of that based on the dimensions and assuming it's a 16th of an inch, because I mean, why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
I mean, you could get easily what the mass ought to be
That's what I'm saying. That's what I
of
would
the
do. I would
stainless, and then your
cut it
offset would
open.
be a certain number, and there you go. You'd
So
also have all your calculations off of that, wouldn't you? You'd have your internal diameter, your internal surface areas and stuff, and you'd be able to, if you drilled a small hole in it, filled it with water, and dumped it out, you'd have a volume test to know exactly, how much material is not stainless steel in there. The thickness. Then you could
mhm.
figure out exactly what's in it. You know,
Yeah,
and
honestly, to be honest with you, Joe, if it started showing radioactivity, dude, I don't know that I would be drilling holes or cutting anything. Okay, I
yeah,
deal with enough playing with coils and stuff. I don't really know that I'd want to get into that. I might, you
yeah,
know, do a
research
couple
that.
videos and
A
send
little
it
research.
off to somebody who does this and has all the precautions.
It depends on what his Geiger counter readers are and if they're consistent, and also like because what you could do is if you could assume the thickness is 16th of an inch, and you assume the material is stainless steel, right? Then you could actually take your Geiger counter reader and then you can you know propose what material could be inside and at what state of decay, like based on those numbers because of the amount of permeation. Unless if it's one of those like nuclear bullets, like the guy was saying in the chat last week, right? Because if it's a nuclear bullet, that means that the inside of it is not the radioactive part, it's the contaminated outside, but that doesn't explain why it's flying through the air. So,
Unless somebody shot it off, and that's what or
oh, like good old Beta cannon or something, railgun.
you never know, man. Look, uh, I like I said, I don't know that I would cut into it. Like I said, it off to the next person, dude. I'm not that curious about it because I think if it's alien stuff, then it's embedded inside the stainless.
I agree with
You
that. Yeah,
couldn't get it to cut open to it anyway.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's
You're not
exactly
going to find
well,
circuits inside of it,
yeah. Well,
so you're just kind of ruining it. I mean, you just opening yourself up into a bunch of potential problems.
I'm not saying drill a hole right through all the glyphs and shit on it. I'm just, like a little DL one. He says it has a null zone in the middle.
Well, that would be even
Well,
more interesting, wouldn't it?
said about the magnetism and all this. It was magnetic at the end, but not in the center. So if you want to think about that as far as field geometry is going, that means that it's creating a field and it's inside the field, which
And
correlates directly with its capabilities that he's proposing, right?
the vortex direction would be the long part. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. I mean, it could be something interesting though. Like, the inside of the thing could like literally just have like minerals packed in the end. Like, Joe's rock. Like
But he didn't have anything that was a weld mark or anything on it. So it was very interesting in that. So, but don't get me wrong, a good bit of welding, shine, polish could do
I was gonna say, man, like,
I mean, yeah, I get it.
but I mean, considering, okay, I will say this. All right, if it is a hoax, the person that welded the caps on the end of the tube and did that was not the same person who did the markings on the outside. I'm throwing that one out there. It's not the same work.
I tend to believe you on that one. Yeah, expert welder like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're not going to get a seamless pipe joint that's polished and perfect and not a single mark on it, or indication that it was welded, and then have somebody sitting there like, oh, you know what, I did such a nice grind job on this, but like, let me do the decorative part now and half-assed it. Yeah, man, probably not so much. But
Mm.
neither here nor there.
Anyway, that thing is pretty funny, man.
Yeah, it's
All
cool.
right.
You know what? Until it's fake, it's real, right? There you go. How's that?
Hey, at least it seems like the radioactive portion's real. Whatever about it past that, we don't know.
Well, let's see what it was doing. Hold on, before we move on. Flickering lights. Okay, you've experienced it. I've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, flickering lights. Yep. Okay. Cool. Um, variant magnetism. Okay, that makes sense with what he's claiming it does. I like that. It's radioactive. Well, it's throwing off radiant energy field, and so far it's got magnetism with an internal differential and external field. Okay, and then it's got radiation all over it. So what do you need in order to kind of get something enticed into the things that we talked about? Strong magnetic field with radiation. Yeah, sounds like a pretty good start. Um, you know, enough magnet. See, so if the magnetism was stronger, the radiation probably wouldn't screw with the lights as bad. Okay, but it would screw with the radio. So
Yeah.
what does that say? It doesn't fly anymore. Okay. So it screws with the radio, and that it screws with the lights. The magnetic field is really, really, really weak. So there you go. End of life cycle. Magnetism dropped off.
Yeah. So hold on. I'm going to show this, Joe. Let me get to the mute. So this is like one of those things that somebody took. And it looks pretty familiar.
Yeah, it does. And it's doing some weird shit.
So
That's doing acrobatics right there, buddy.
yeah, so it matches what it looks like at least.
And sort of what he said that it described. He said that it kind of like paused and like looked at him and then flew off, and then another one flew back, and the one that flew back is the one that crashed, right? So
Yeah. I don't know, man. I just think it's interesting, and he's sharing the story with us.
yep, that's cool. And that's probably the best footage of something similar to that I've seen, for what it's worth.
Yeah, so who knows, man? Who knows? Well, we'll have to keep going with his story and see where it leads. So
Yep.
yeah. Okay. Joe, do you have the Discord link?
I mean, I could try. You might lose me for a second, but I'll come back.
All right.
Give me a sec. Can I put it in the chat through? Yeah, I guess I can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they'll probably come right after you for it. That's for sure. I think if he releases the levels that the Geiger counter went off to an expansion like he should, then yeah, they probably would have already would have came and got it from him. So and he said that so much in his video as well. Yeah, some things are just balloons. I understand that. Okay, won't say it won't. A lot of people think that the one where the missile hit it, it was a balloon that it hit. That's why the missile didn't go off. So, and that's why the balloon shattered and whatever else. So, there's always people saying the balloon thing. That's for sure.
All right. I think I was able to do that successfully.
Right on. I'm gonna have to pull that and put it somewhere where I can find it all the time.
Yep.
Cool, cool.
Got to make yourself a text pad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna help for everything we're doing, man. So right on. Hey, also Mike's channel today is going on at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Go over and check out Faraday Research Channel. And gonna be cool, man. So anyway, that's it, guys. There's the Discord link. And then we'll be on Traveling Fools later tonight. So check us out. It'll be on this channel, also theirs. So don't worry about just clue in here, and we'll have that whole discussion going on. So with that said, guys, have a great night.
Peace and love.
The old man Bill. The old man Bill. The old man Bill. The old man Bill. The old man builds is broken in the head. People not seeing reality has put them in the red. Where conscious and spirituality been stricken from the norm and replaced with the ignorance of basic magnetic form. The geometry of God keeps running through his head. That's what makes old man builds broken in the head. The old man builds. The old man builds. Spheres of destiny are spinning in his mind, making him travel back and forth in time, battling the establishment for just a little recognition. Has him forcing the world to understand his premonition. That world will have all the technology in the end, even if it means his life will fail to instead. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man builds. Fears of destiny are spinning in his mind, making him travel back and forth in time, battling the establishment for just a little recognition. Has him forcing the world to understand his premonition. That world will have all the technology in the end, even if it means his life will fail to extend. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man builds. Fears of destiny are spinning in his mind, making him travel back and forth in time, battling the establishment for just a little recognition. Has him forcing the world to understand his premonition. That world will have all the technology in the end, even if it means his life will fail to extend. The old man builds.